Ladies and gentlemen, when we think about short kings with mustaches, we usually think about two kinds of people. One of them collectivized farms and shot his enemies. The other one collectivized bears and came out of a tree stump. And today we're talking about the one who looks cuter with the mustache. But here's the thing. Everyone who's ever watched the Lorax and has half a brain still remaining after all their doom scrolling since 2012 thinks they already know what it's about. Capitalism's bad, trees are good, Ed Helms is basically Satan, etc, etc. Well, actually, the Lorax isn't about capitalism being evil. It's about capitalism being charming. And that's how I'm gonna ruin your day. So I'm not gonna bore you with the setup. At this point, I'm sure everyone has seen the Lorax already. If not, I'm genuinely wondering what rock you've been living under. Our main guy Ted, played by Zac Efron, who has single-handedly managed to put more plastic in his face than the entirety of Thneedle, finally tracks down the Onceler to impress a girl and maybe get some action on the side. There, the Onceler tells him a story. He arrived at the Truffula forest alone, just a guy with a card and a dream. The forest is thriving. Animals everywhere, fruits, singing birds, dancing fish, sugar, spice, everything nice, chemical X. And then he chops down a tree, just one. The cutting of that one tree is the original sin of capitalism, by the way. Marx calls this primitive accumulation. The moment when something that belonged to everyone, say a shared world or a living forest for this example, gets seized, enclosed, and turned into a resource. Nobody voted on it. Nobody agreed. One axe swing and suddenly the forest isn't a forest anymore. It's a supply chain. And the moment the Onceler has something to sell, he calls his family. And they come running, because that's how it always works. The first enclosure never stays small. It summons everything that comes after it. The Lorax pops out of the stump of the first chopped tree. He's genuinely pissed, and there's no denying that. But here's the thing. He doesn't stop it. He sits there, witnesses the trees getting cut, puts a label on it, and just gets ignored because the axe has already been swung and the machines are now in motion. So the Onceler has a forest, a family, and a product.
That's the need. Find something that all people need.
According to the Lorax wiki, it costs $3.98, which is roughly $30 adjusted for inflation in today's money.
It is a rust remover, a tightrope, a toothbrush holder, it's a hat, it's a potato sack, it's a flag. And if those are not enough compelling reasons for you to spend your hard-earned $30 on a thneed instead of a white monster and a pack of Zins, I have listed every way you can use a thneed in the video description.
All jokes aside though, the whole thing of the thneed is that it's undefined. The whole genius behind the thneed is that it's just this undefined pink fluffy object. And the jingle can define it for you. Marx calls this commodity fetishism. Here's the thing about a commodity. It has two lives. There's its use value, which is what it actually does, what it's made of, who made it, what making it costs, all those beautiful stuff. And then there's the exchange value, which is what you're willing to pay for it. And capitalism's trick is to make you forget the use value entirely. I want you to think about your smartphone or any other device that you might be watching this video on. We all have these electronic devices that we use on a daily basis. We tend to see them as these sleek objects that have a price tag and a feeling of status and identity attached to it. We belong to the group of iPhone users, or we have a PlayStation, or we prefer to wear Nikes, we prefer to drink Pepsi over Coke, or vice versa. All of these happen because it satisfies a sense of belonging in us. What we don't see is the fact that there are human beings just like me and you with families, hopes and dreams who go to sleep every night and wake up each morning to work in the cobalt mines in Congo to produce the raw material that is required to build those batteries in our devices. The violence behind having a piece of technology in our hands is completely invisible. That is what commodity fetishism is. Now, in this case, the thneed doesn't necessarily hide what it is. It never told you what it was in the first place. The forest living world, which is the trees, the animals, the air, they're all just laundered into this pink fluff with a price tag. You don't get to see the violence. You don't get to see how it affects the inhabitants of the forest, how those bears are going homeless, how everyone's being abused, how the Onceler is making his own empire. You just get to see the product smiling at you and scratching that itch that was created because you didn't have a thneed. The Onceler doesn't even need to believe in the thneed after it's introduced. The fetish believes for him. All he needs to do is keep making more of them. But here's what's even more wild. Nobody in this story can see what's happening. Not the customers, not the family, not even the Onceler himself. And that's the deepest horror of commodity fetishism. It doesn't just blind the consumer, it also blinds the producer. The Onceler doesn't look at the Truffula forest and see a living ecosystem being destroyed. He sees inventory, he sees supplies, he sees a number going up on a spreadsheet. Marx has this idea he calls the social life of things. He basically explains how once a commodity enters the market, it takes on a life of its own. It starts lying to you. The object basically detaches from everything that has already made it. It detaches from the labor, from the land, from the violence, and it becomes just a thing with a price tag. And that price tag is the only truth that matters at that point. Which brings us to the song, How Bad Can I Be? I think that song is the little arc of the Onceler. The song is not a villain monologue per se. That's just a businessman asking a market question. How bad can I be and still keep the machine running? And the answer capitalism gives him is as bad as it takes. As long as his needs are selling, the market is telling him he's doing something right. Growth is the proof of his virtue. Profit is proof of his fitness. So he keeps on biggering his company. He even says it himself that it's just survival of the fittest, that the strong survive, the weak get eaten. But the thing is, that's not survival of the fittest. See, if it was survival of the fittest, the strong would have survived. The Onceler doesn't survive. He ends up alone in a boarded up ruin outside of the town, sitting in darkness and sadness. The fetish told him he was winning right until there was nothing left to win. And when the Lorax and the bears try to push back, the machine literally rolls over them. The Onceler doesn't even flinch, because in the logic of commodity fetishism, they're not inhabitants of a living world. They're an obstacle to production, an externality, a cost to be absorbed. The fetish doesn't just hide the violence from the consumer, it hides it from the man holding the axe. But the question is, why does the Onceler think this is the right thing to do? Think about it. Why would he justify this as an act of common sense with principles in business and nature? So far everything has been kind of obvious, but here's what's actually happening in this movie that nobody talks about. In the world of Thneedville, nobody is forced into anything. Nobody is losing any agency here. The Onceler's family shows up excited. The customers buy the thneed willingly. The people of Thneedville thank O'Hare for the bottled air. And Ted, who is supposed to be the hero of the story, isn't even trying to save the world or do something for the common good. He's just trying to impress a girl who is ironically voiced by Taylor Swift, by the way. Nevertheless, the Lorax spends the entirety of this film asking nicely, pleading, arguing, and getting ignored. For the most part, he isn't even getting suppressed or arrested. Everyone genuinely believes in that system. To them, nothing is out of the ordinary. It is what it is, and it is what it's supposed to be. This is what Antonio Gramsci, a 19th century philosopher, calls hegemony. He says basically that the most effective form of control isn't a gun to your head. It's making you want the thing that's gonna destroy you. It's when the values of the ruling class become common sense, natural, just the way things are. Think about it like this. We all have shelters and we all commute from A to B. And it really doesn't matter that much if you take the bus, or if you drive a 1999 Buick, or if you drive a 2026 Porsche. No one ever put a gun to your head and said, climb the corporate ladder. But you want those things. And you feel vaguely bad about yourself when you don't have them. That feeling right there, that's hegemony. The system doesn't need to coerce you because it's already convinced you. You're basically running the rat race voluntarily and calling it ambition. Real power isn't forcing people to obey. Real power is when the people at the bottom defend the interests of the people at the top and think it was their own idea. Conveniently for us, O'Hare has his own masterclass in hegemony. He doesn't sell bottled air. O'Hare sells the idea that fresh air is dangerous, that the walls keep you safe, that there is impending doom beyond those walls, that the wilderness is something to fear. He manufactures consent before you even know you need consent, before you even need convincing. But consent has a backup plan, and that backup plan is almost always in the form of ideology. Now, ideology doesn't mean what most people think it means. It's not just propaganda, it's not just lies. Ideology is the system of ideas, values, and beliefs that a society uses to explain itself to itself. It's basically the society's defense mechanism. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a shadowy group of people in a room deciding what you should think. It's the stories a society tells about why things are the way they are, why some people have more, why some people have less, what success looks like, what is failure, what's natural, what's not natural, and those stories get repeated in schools, in movies, in the news, in conversations at the dinner table. They get repeated and repeated and repeated until they stop feeling like stories and start feeling like facts. Ideology is the frame through which you see everything in the society. It decides what questions feel worth asking and which questions feel crazy. It decides what counts as realistic and what counts as naive. It doesn't need to lie to you. It just needs to make certain truths feel obvious and certain questions feel stupid. That's when ideology becomes common sense. The ruling ideas of every age are the ideas of the ruling class, not because they're directly brainwashing the society, but because the ruling class usually owns the schools, the media, the culture, and all of these ideas usually trickle downstream from power. Thneedville now is ideology made literal. Think about it. The city has fake trees and this bubbly, colorful aura about it, right? Nobody gets to question that. Nobody wakes up in Thneedville and says, wait, our trees aren't real, we're fucked. Because within the world of Thneedville, this is just what trees look like. This is what trees have looked like for ages now. This is just how the air is supposed to smell like. This is just how things are. The kids in Thneedville have never even seen a real tree. So they don't even have the slightest idea that something is wrong. So they don't miss it. You can't want what you can't imagine. And that's the point. Ideology doesn't suppress the alternative. It makes the alternative unthinkable. The most powerful ideology is the one that feels like reality. But remember when I said consent always has a backup plan? Well, in the capitalist world, that backup plan also has its own backup plan. See, every society has an ideology, and this ideology needs to be passed down from generation to generation. That's how it survives. And this ideology uses certain tools in order to do that. These tools are called institutions. Things like schools, media, laws, culture, and none of these are ever 100% neutral. They're biased in a way that benefits that ideology. They're the infrastructure that ideology moves in and through it. They shape what you think is normal, what you think is possible, what you think is yours to question and what isn't. And according to 20th century philosopher Louis Althusser, these institutions operate in two modes. See, at one end, we have ideological state apparatuses. Things like the jingle, the school, the advertisement, the culture. Very soft and warm things. These produce the consent. They make you want to comply by promoting the existing shared values and beliefs, by promoting the attitudes that serve the dominant capitalist class. They make you thank O'Hare for the air. But behind them, on the other end of the spectrum, sit the repressive state apparatuses, the ones that actually involve one or more form of violence to form compliance. The wall, the goons that are always following O'Hare, the cameras, the Onceler's aunt specifically. That one lady is the definition of a repressive state apparatus.
That's a woman?
The repressive state apparatuses are the things that kick in when the soft jingles stop working. And that's why the Lorax isn't losing because capitalism is powerful. He's losing because capitalism is likable, and if you don't like it, it's gonna correct you. So the Lorax argues and argues and argues and loses every time because you can't out-argue hegemony. You can't debate your way out of ideology. The Lorax is playing chess while the Onceler is playing Monopoly. And then the last tree falls. Not because the Lorax won. Not because Ted showing up was foretold. Not because anyone had a change of heart. The monster stops because there is nothing left to cut. In simpler terms, no trees mean no fiber. No fiber, no thneed. No thneed, no profit. And no profit means collapse. Capitalism is a system that perpetually devours its own foundations. It runs on contradictions. It needs nature to yield from, but it exhausts nature. It needs workers to produce, but it breaks them by unfairness and low wages. It needs consumers to profit, but it impoverishes them by consumerism and prices. This is what James O'Connor called the second contradiction of capitalism. Capitalism doesn't just exploit people. It destroys the very conditions that make exploitation possible. It destroys the very means necessary for its own existence. The monster didn't get beaten by the Lorax. The monster gets beaten by a mirror and his own reflection. And that, my friends, has been the ideological analysis of the Lorax. Thank you.